Hello, and today's conversation brings together museum directors who are shaping New York's cultural landscape. In this conversation, Stefanie Hessler, Sohrab Mohebbi, and Mariët Westermann will be in discussion with Marko Gluhaich. Marko Gluhaich is a writer and associate editor of Frieze magazine. At Frieze, he edits the column section. He was previously at Cabinet magazine and lives and works in New York City. Stefanie Hessler is the director of Swiss Institute New York. Her work centers artists and ideas through new commissions, transdisciplinary collaborations, and experimental formats. At Swiss Institute, Hessler co-curated Spora, which invites artists to transform the institution through environmental institutional critique. Other recent exhibitions include Parcours Art Basel, the 17th Momenta Biennale, Montreal, Rising Tides, Gropius Bau, Berlin, Joan Jonas, Ocean Space, Venice, and the 6th Athens Biennale. Sohrab Mohebbi is the director of SculptureCenter. He served as the Kathy and Jim Petrinos curator of the 58th Carnegie International. Before joining SculptureCenter in 2018, he was associate editor at Red Cat in Los Angeles and curatorial fellow at the Queens Museum. Mariët Westermann is director and CEO of the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum and Foundation, directing its flagship in New York and overseeing the Guggenheim sites at Venice, Bilbao, and Abu Dhabi. Westermann previously was vice chancellor and chief executive of NYU Abu Dhabi, having been founding provost. She served as executive vice president of the Mellon Foundation and director of NYU's Institute of Fine Arts. Thank you all for being here today, and with that, I'll pass it over to Marko.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm very excited to be moderating today's conversation on New Ideas New York and to be speaking with the leaders of such incredible New York institutions. Thank you to the three of you for being here today, and thank you to the audience for joining us on this final day of the Armory Show's 30th edition. Today's panelists, Stefanie Hessler, Sohrab Mohebbi, and Mariët Westermann, helm three unique, dynamic, and thoughtfully provocative art spaces here in New York: the Swiss Institute in Manhattan's East Village, the SculptureCenter in Queens, Long Island City, and the Guggenheim Museum in the Upper East Side. Each of them has been appointed their role during the last 3 years, a time when art spaces in both New York and elsewhere have had to reckon with the possibilities and limitations with older models of institution building. The title of today's program alludes to the shifting New York arts landscape and how these three are creatively reframing institutional thinking. I think our conversation will demonstrate how we can look to the Swiss Institute, SculptureCenter, and Guggenheim as models for how an arts organization can be. The four of us will speak for 45 minutes or so, and then have time for questions from the audience. I've structured this to introduce each director and ask them a question pertinent to their practice, and then follow up with more general questions for the group. However, I have encouraged the participants to chime in, so to keep this an open dialogue. Mariët, I'd like to begin with you. In June of this year, you started in your role as director and CEO of the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum and Foundation, directing its flagship institution in New York, overseeing the foundation and the Peggy Guggenheim Collection in Venice, and providing collaborative leadership working with the directors of the Guggenheim Museum Bilbao and the future Guggenheim Abu Dhabi. Already, the ethos you bring to the Guggenheim is taking a clear shape. Having come from the NYU Abu Dhabi, you've described the Guggenheim Group using the language of constellations. You've related an understanding of a model of collection building to one of collection sharing. You've described needing to take a quote-unquote open approach to institutional growth and development. I was wondering if you could speak more to the environment that necessitates this shift and what an open approach looks like to you.
Thank you very much, Marko, and it's an honor to be on this panel with such distinguished colleagues. Thank you all for being here. When you think about art museums today, or the whole art ecosystem, it is clear that we've seen a major shift in the way people come to museums and what they expect of them. And I think that is because the old model, where museums like the Guggenheim or any of our great museums in New York City or the world would just be able to put out an exhibition and offer and say, come to us, enjoy it, act in a way like a professor, right? The sage on the stage. Well, the sage on the stage isn't working anymore in universities. In universities, we are guides by the side of learning. And museums increasingly are acting similarly, and they need to, because when we had what you might call an exhibition economy, where people would come and you could kind of expect that people would trust you for giving a great exhibition, as we should and still do, more is required now to engage people, because the museum audiences have become so much more diverse, so much more interesting, I would say, and they are demanding other things from us as institutions, because traditional museum institutions in the United States and Europe certainly were built on a model where that was quite elitist and reached out to people of a certain income, a certain education level that was closely associated with certain kinds of people, people of certain race, ethnicity, class, and so forth. That has really changed. So that is one of the reasons we need to open ourselves up in very different ways, and we've seen that. I think at the Guggenheim, we are in a somewhat advantaged position for two reasons. First of all, we're dedicated to modern and contemporary art. There is an enormous interest in modern and contemporary art across the ecosystem of culture in a way that 40 years ago you couldn't even have imagined. There's a flow towards entertainment, media, even sports, style, design that really makes us very attractive. And the second thing is, of course, that the Guggenheim Museum is a constellation of museums. It isn't just that gorgeous World Heritage Site, Frank Lloyd Wright building on the Upper East Side on Fifth Avenue, although we love it and cherish it. We are a transnational institution. We always have been since 1937 when the foundation was created. And you see that in our relationships to the Peggy Guggenheim collection in Venice, the Guggenheim Museum Bilbao that has been such a runaway success, and the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi that will open in 2 years. So this allows us to share culture across and art across our sites, and especially exchange knowledge in these 4 really open maritime global cities where we operate.
Great, thank you. Sohrab, you became director of the SculptureCenter in 2022 after serving as both curator and curator at large since 2018. In previous roles, you've put on acclaimed exhibitions such as the 2021 Ryndon Johnson show that traveled to London's Chisenhale and a 2020 Tishan Su survey that went to the Hammer in Los Angeles. You also guest curated 2022's excellent Carnegie International in Pittsburgh. You've been said to have focused on the curator-artist relationship in each of your projects. Recently, as director, you initiated an open call as part of In Practice, SculptureCenter's initiative to invite artists who have not yet had an institutional solo exhibition in New York City to submit proposals for solo exhibitions in designated gallery spaces at SculptureCenter. I want to ask what inspired this decision, and what are some of the other initiatives that you've implemented and how you see those contributing to SculptureCenter's future?
Hello? Okay, thank you, Marko. And thanks for having me, and Thomas and Zoe and everyone. And Mariët, welcome to New York. It's great to have you here. And get to be in touch, in conversation with you, Steffi. And well, yeah, I mean, one thing I think is interesting about SculptureCenter is that it started in 1928 and was founded by artists. So it's a 100-year history of artist-led organizations. So the idea to be, I kind of like to think that if we serve the artists, then we serve the public. And even through this 100 years now, we have a board that has, you know, we have 6 artists on the board and a chair is the artist. So I feel like this part of it is part of our DNA. But regarding the program and the changes that you were thinking, it really came from that response that we've received from the artists. So the open call, for instance, that you mentioned has been going on for 20 years as a group show. And then we completely restructured it as a series of solo exhibitions that runs every 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks. So to step back, I think the question was how can we create a program that operates on different registers? So if we think about, let's say, a botanical garden, you have the perennials that go around the year, and then you have the other forms, like, you have the bulbs, you have the kind of annuals that kind of show up in different moments, So to think about one season and then that how it intersects with these in-practice solo shows that rotate, and then downstairs where we're really focusing on the time of the body. And so then if you come into SculptureCenter, you're kind of like experiencing 3 different temporal registers that kind of respond to the architecture of the space. So in a way, that was kind of the impetus to kind of think about some of these changes. So one was to change in practice into a series of solo shows. And that's been, the artists really responded to that. We have over 1,400 applications every year. The commissioning program has become extremely international. And we really want to ensure to show artists that don't have gallery representation in New York. All of our commission is the artist's first institutional show in New York. And this is like in a really impactful moment in an artist's journey or career. So if you think about, Rashid Johnson's show at SculptureCenter was 2009. So was Simone Lee. Or Naira Bagrami was 2013. So these are, that's the moment that we came in, and we come in and we would like to support artists in that crucial moment. So then, then later we can see that the 8 artists out of like SculptureCenter's past 3 years were in the Piano. So that's kind of the purpose, the role that we'd like to play, and to support the artists in that way. Yeah.
That sounds great. Thank you. Stefanie, when you became director of the Swiss Institute in 2022, you initiated a series of environmental reforms to the space, looking at its infrastructure and internal protocols, as well as organizing programs like Spora, which invited artists to develop works that interfere with the structure of the building, the processes of Swiss Institute, and the way that you all work there. Before coming to Swiss Institute, you directed Kunsthal Trondheim in Norway, where you co-led the research-based exhibition Sex Ecologies and edited the accompanying compendium on queer ecologies, sexuality, and care in more than human worlds. Prior to that, you curated the 17th Momenta Biennale titled Sensing Nature in Montreal, which looked at different ways of sensing the natural world, and in return, to allow nature to respond in ways imagined, projected, and real. I want to ask you, how can we redefine the ways we think about arts institutes so that they can be environmentally sustainable and built with climate action in mind as opposed to wastefulness?
Thank you for this question, and thanks for having me on this panel. It's great to be here with you, Marko, and Sohrab, and yes, welcome to New York. Thank you for this question. So when I moved here and asked myself what an institution at this age can be, I really thought that it would be relevant and necessary even to rethink the ways in which we work, to become more environmental, to become more sustainable, but not in a dogmatic way, but in a way that is experimental, in a way that admits that it can fail, and in a way that also acknowledges that the process is always going to be imperfect, no matter how urgent it is. And at the same time, it is urgent, and so we need to start tackling it. And so we began by organizing workshops with the entire team to think what we can do differently. We developed an 8-point plan, including transport, travel, waste, energy, etc. Those are all very operational changes and shifts that we're making with the entire team, and that we continue to workshop together through regular meetings involving everybody from curators to operations to development, education, and so on. But also, and perhaps most importantly, we invited artists into those conversations as well. And we asked them not only to dream up a project that they might develop for Swiss Institute, but also to think with us about interventions in the building and, as you mentioned, in the processes in which we work. So there are some images running here of the project with that you mentioned called Spora, where the artist Jenna Sutela proposed a compost to us. And it's not just any compost, but a compost inspired by a figure from Fraggle Rock, the TV show, where there is a trash pile called Marjorie. Marjorie is a matronly figure. She knows everything. She's seen it all because everybody's depositing their trash in Marjorie. And so in the TV show, she is also an oracle. And so Jenna's compost is a real compost that we use as Swiss Institute staff, where we deposit our food scraps. And then there are hundreds and thousands of worms inside, and the electrochemical processes and the heat that they generate power a speaker that is transmitting oracle messages generated with an AI over the rooftop of the East Village. So it's sort of contributing to the punk jazz history of the neighborhood as well. And another project is by Helen Mirror, who made a score for us that whenever we repaint the interstitial spaces of the gallery, so the hallways, the stairways, and so on, we're not allowed to use any new paint, but only leftover paint from other projects. And so you can see this commitment to sustainability now on the walls of the building, where I actually love sometimes when people come to the building, they think, oh, what's happening at Swiss Institute? The place seems to be falling apart because it doesn't, adhere to this kind of perfect white cube logic that we're so very used to, and which you also, in a way, alluded to, the old ways of thinking institutions. And so we're going to continue with these projects. We're inaugurating a new set of furniture using an experimental environmental plastic, bioplastic, by the artist Christian Jampeter, which will be launched later this fall, and which will be a furniture for our rooftop terrace and create a space of conviviality. So I think, acknowledging, again, that institutions need to change, but doing it in a way, in an experimental way, and in an artist-led way, that's really my focus and our focus at Swiss Institute.
Great, thank you. It's great to have a space like Swiss Institute to have such initiatives happen and set sort of models. One question that I want to ask to all of you, kind of dovetailing your response, Stefanie, are the different ways that your institutions support artists? Sohrab, you've spoken about in practice. Stefanie, you're speaking about the ways in which artists can engage environmentally. I want to start with you, Mariët, about the different ways that your work at the Guggenheim looks to support artists and the institutions across the city that bolster artists' careers as well. That's those sorts of relationships.
It's a great question, and we've already heard several really inspiring examples here from Sohrab and from Stefanie. Stefanie, I'm still thinking of your tens of thousands of worms, which is really interesting because Frank Lloyd Wright put plants in our building from the beginning. And of course, plants are in soil, and soil thrives by worms. So I'm going to count our worms too. Setting that aside, we're not just a museum of worms. We are very much led by artists and the vision that artists have, the way artists can look around corners that others don't, the way they look at the world in ways that others don't, and can help us see things that are not always immediately discernible in what we say or what we turn into a mathematical formula or a computer program, although artists do that too. So because we are a museum dedicated to modern and contemporary art and have been from the beginning, the Museum of the Art of Today, which was sort of a revolutionary idea in 1929 when Solomon Guggenheim got rid of his old masters and started collecting the art of today, like Kandinsky you've seen come around, at a time that he was little known in America. Because we have that in our mission, we collect. It sounds like an obvious thing, but institutions need to collect the art of today if decades and I hope centuries from now, people will be able to draw human stories out of them for the future. this is what sets us apart from, say, a Kunsthalle or an exhibition space alone, although we make exhibitions all the time, and that's one of the ways in which we, of course, support artists. But we collect them, we preserve their art, we spend a lot of resources, brainpower, and money on conservation. And of course, we commission artists as well, often in relation to the exhibitions that we make. And all of those areas seem so humdrum and self-evident, but many institutions that show contemporary art today don't directly collect or encourage the preservation and deep research that goes on through time on the work of artists so that they can not just enter a canon, but actively reshape the canon of modern and contemporary art. And I think in the 3 months that I've been on this job, this is actually literally day 100. You know, people always talk about 100 days.
Congrats.
Day 100 on the, thank you, on the job, delving deep into our collection, which is really art from, essentially from Van Gogh to today. You can say, it's really inspiring to see that over the last 30 years, how actively we have been expanding and diversifying that canon, both in terms of the American artists in our collection, but also very much world artists. I just came back from another frieze enterprise at Seoul in Korea, where again, the Guggenheim has been part of the rapidly evolving art ecosystem, an ecosystem of artists since the 1990s. So it's very inspiring to see what you can do, even if your mission stays essentially the same.
Thank you, that's great. Stefanie and Sohrab, if you would like to add anything about initiatives and methodologies for interacting with local artist communities and programs that you have to support artists.
So we show a very international program. It's in our DNA. We were founded by Swiss immigrants in the 80s and have been an independent organization since. So a very international program is part of our DNA. We commission artists to organize, oftentimes we organize their first exhibition in New York or in the United States, similar to what you guys do at SculptureCenter. We have a residency program, and we organize residencies for artists from all over the world in the city, connect them with the ecosystem here. And we also we do publications. So, for example, the image that you see here from Raven Chacon's exhibition, it was his first large solo exhibition in an institution in New York. And he's an incredible artist, composer, musician, Pulitzer Prize winning, MacArthur Genius Grant winning, but he's not had a major exhibition. So very often we organize exhibitions of overlooked or artists that we believe deserve an exhibition at an institution in New York. And we also published his first monograph. So it was a large research project led by our chief curator, Alison Copeland, who put together this beautiful publication. And we partner with other institutions internationally as well to co-produce exhibitions and to ensure wider visibility of the artist's work. But perhaps what sets us apart, because we do not have a collection, is that we can really be experimental and we can be really we can try and we can fail as well, which I think is really important to give that sort of space to artists and to accompany them in the process. For example, when we make new commissions or invite them to do new commissions, it's always artist-led, and we accompany them all the way curatorially through production support and so on, and hope to enable whatever project it is that they would like to do.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just to expand on that, I think this question of experimentation and art comes up a lot, and I think we all believe that art is utopian and experimental. I think that is true. Where we look at that is in a way, by commissioning artists who don't have New York galleries or galleries in general, one thing that it does is that it operates beyond the pressures of the market to create a certain form of art or participate in it. So that is one space of experimentation that I think is really important to retain, and organizations like SculptureCenter really provide that space. On the other hand, we have the space and resources to create very ambitious first commissions, however, without the let's say, bureaucracy of a larger museum. So in that way, we create like two different forms of freedom, and I think, you know, that is where we really step in. One of the other programs that we initiated alongside in practice, and I just want to say the good thing about the open call is this a way to address our curatorial blind spot. So we do have a program, and then the open call comes in to really address that, because obviously we can't see everything, and that's impossible. So even with that, it's still, we will fail, but you know, to have that other avenue is really important. And then downstairs, we've started a new process. It's called Open Process, is a new project where the idea is that the exhibition is not a necessity, and to kind of like forefront that, it really liberates the artists and the pressure of like what to show and how to show it, but actually like think about the time that they spend in the space as one of the components that they're working with. So this summer we had the choreographer Alexa West, who just took over the space with 4 of her dancers. They would come and, you know, they had this very kind of unscripted encounters, because people might go down there and they will rehearse a scene, they will rehearse a vignette, and created this different relationship with the audience that they usually wouldn't have, let's say, in their own studio. And that really led to 4 open rehearsals that she developed through that. So to think about, I think like this question of operating on these different temporal registers has been really interesting for us to kind of to follow. Yeah, I think that's kind of maybe like answers a little bit your question.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you. I want to move on from looking inside the space to looking out at the local communities, and ask you guys, maybe we could start again with you, Sohrab, about the ways that you all are considering engaging local audiences, and also how does that affect your programming decisions?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think with every institution, depending where they are, it changes. Long Island City is a very different neighborhood. So this is, I like to say it's a neighborhood of the future. And why do I say that? Because SculptureCenter moved to Long Island City in 2001. So in 2001, we had low manufacturing, and we had, you know, garages, and we had parking lots there. So now it's the fastest growing neighborhood in the country. There were over 80,000 units, apartment residential units built in this neighborhood in the past few years. There's $35,000 more. These figures, I have it here. I don't want to look at it. But just to say, this is a neighborhood in total transformation. And I think this shift to becoming a residential neighborhood is really informing what we can do. So as an institution that really was a destination, so people are interested in art, want to follow an artist program, would go there. Now we are looking at a neighborhood that in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years will have a very different population. The foot traffic has increased 300% in the past 3 years. So if you think about that, so now we have really increasing our public program, and that's something I think upon us to do more. So one of the reasons to kind of redefine downstairs and have these different moments of like opening up the institution is really related to the fact that we started from a dead end in Long Island City where we were the tallest building in that block. That was built in 1905. Now we are the shortest building on the block. So if you think about it, that really changes how we are operating that neighborhood. So I think that's part of our mission, and our mission is changing because of that, because of the changes in neighborhoods. So the increased public program is really essential for us right now to think about, yeah, how to serve this neighborhood of the future. When I worked at the Queens Museum as a fellow in 2010, Tom Finkelpearl was the director there, and he always said, he used to say, Manhattan's the past, Brooklyn is the present, and Queens is the future. And I always remember that. I think like, that's kind of true, actually. You know what I mean? And so that kind of thinking, and you know, if you think about our neighborhood, the other funny thing to think about is that we're like the Upper East Side of emerging art, you know? It's like with like SculptureCenter, PS1, Socrates, you can see how that is a place where artists usually first get their first shows in New York. So anyway, with regards to the neighborhood, you know. Yeah. It's a fun trip. There's 6 subways who go there. So.
Thank you. Stefanie, how do you consider this within the context of the East Village, New York more generally, engaging local audiences and your programming related to that?
For us, partnerships with local community organizations have been really, really important in the past. So we have a partnership with the Women's Prison Association, for example, with Free Arts, Fab New York, and other organizations. But perhaps one example that I could mention is when I moved here, and this happens to me wherever I live, I become obsessed with hyper-local history. When I lived in Norway, I learned Norwegian and had a subscription to the local newspaper and got completely obsessed with understanding how the neighborhood is changing, how the city is changing, to a, almost obsessive point. And when I moved here, I did research, of course, into the history of the East Village and also the environmental history of the East Village, which, of course, as we understand, is never only the environment or nature as that thing set apart from culture, but also social processes. And I came across this incredible story where in the 1970s, during the oil crisis, and when the neighborhood was completely neglected and landlords were setting fires to their buildings for insurance money, there was a group of people, homeless activists, and recent graduates from engineering and architecture programs who wanted to change the world. So they got together and they refurbished one of the torched buildings and installed solar panels and a wind turbine on the roof of the building. And they generated their own electricity during the 70s, the many power outages, 1977 outage included, and then started to feed any surplus energy back into the Con Edison grid. Con Ed obviously did not love that. They felt threatened in their monopoly, and they retaliated with a major lawsuit. But the co-op won the case, and this led to a change in law and regulations nationwide in 1978, which made green energy, however flawed that might be, possible in the US. And so I now interview together with my team all the people that we could track down who are still around from that time, and we assembled the archive from that history, and we invited 19 contemporary artists to exhibit at Swiss Institute and to respond in part. It's partly new commissions, but partly also existing work, really looking at a very international context and the politics, social dimensions, ecological dimensions of energy. And we're also collaborating with the various neighborhood organizations who focus on environmental and housing questions. And for example, at the original site of the wind turbine, the artist Otterbong Nkanga is making a new mural, and that mural will stay on long-term view, so it's a gesture to the community and an offering to the community. We're collaborating with the Lower East Side Ecology Center and also 2 neighborhood organizations, the Loizaida Inc. Center, which is a Puerto Rican Latinx community center, and the Museum of Reclaimed Urban Space. And both of those organizations are putting on their own exhibitions as part of our show. So it'll be an exhibition spread out in the entire neighborhood, really also highlighting the work of other institutions and with an extensive public program accompanying it all throughout the fall. And it'll open on Wednesday, so come visit us.
I can't wait. Mariët, this question also is a little different for you considering the constellation of Guggenheims. And does that, we're focusing on New York in this conversation, but does that contribute in any ways to your considerations for the constellative aspect of Guggenheim affect your considerations for a local New York audience, as well as the programming that you're doing here and abroad?
Well, we are, as you say, an international museum almost by definition, but we're very focused on our Frank Lloyd Wright building the Solomon Art Guggenheim Museum on Fifth Avenue as well, and that's for this conversation most relevant. Well, we are obviously on the Upper East Side, and I probably don't need to tell anybody here that the UES doesn't shine for demographic diversity. There's more diversity than you'd think maybe, but it doesn't fully represent all of New York or our greater metropolitan area. And we are keenly aware that our museum isn't just for tourists, although historically, tourists are a large percentage of our draw. We help the city with this, of course, like the other museums, like the Met and so forth. More than 50% historically of our audience have been tourists. That waned a little bit, obviously, even in the years immediately after COVID. Now, interestingly, we are deeply interested in engaging more people to come to the museum because they care about it and they value what we have to offer. And here, interestingly, we have two tailwinds that are helping us with this. And one, bizarrely enough, is the COVID-19 pandemic, because it made all of us focus on the importance of the local, on who is right around us, on who is in our city, who live here and who need things that are not being served right now, or might be able to contribute to something to change us from the inside. And so I think that's been very inspiring to us. The second major force is, of course, climate change. Museums in the 80s, 90s, and the noughts became quite addicted to international travel, international circulating exhibitions. There is incredible value in this, of course. There's value in meeting others, going there to know there, as I like to say, and the Guggenheim offers that opportunity. But it is also really important to recognize the very diversity of human achievement and aspiration we have in our own communities. And New York is the classic example. People who hail from 200 countries live here in some way or another. And so the way we are going about this is partly through our learning and education programs across the learning journey from pre-K through Gray and beyond, I like to say. Our Learning Through Art program has run for 40 years and brings in students from schools of all ages through very lively programs. They get to show their art in the museum at the end. You've seen some of the images of exhibitions of this art from young people on the walls. Their families come. This is a very powerful way to do it. And I also think it is letting the artists lead. The artists lead on so many elements of the Guggenheim's program and always have, particularly when it comes to climate conversations, conversations about important social issues of our time. And next year, we will have a great Rashid Johnson show. Thank you for showing him so early, Sohrab. And Rashid's exhibition, this major figure of American arts and global arts today, really will focus, it will be a gift to the city, is how I think of it. It isn't as if tourists from around the world won't love it. They will. But it will be a very long manifestation through the year, about 8 months, where there will be many stages for engagement of artists who will be invited in, musicians who will be invited in, community organizations, particular school programs and so forth, targeted in a sort of novel ways to reach particular segments of the population and giving them a chance to kind of experience the inspiring building and the great artist that Rashid is.
That's all incredible, and I'm really excited for the exhibition next year. I think we have to move, not have to, I think it's time to move on to the Q&A from the audience. So Zoe, I think we'll be passing around a microphone if there are any questions. We have a question up here.
Stefanie, I think you talked about, you mentioned something about failure twice, and so I'm curious to hear you kind of expand on accounting for failure, especially as you're building programs for artists.
Thank you for coming back to that comment. So some years ago, there was a lot of conversation about curatorial methodologies, and they were sort of, very much centered around objects and around exhibitions that would perhaps exemplify a thesis or a curatorial vision. And my own work is a lot more about process, and the artists that I tend to work with and in the ways in which I work with those artists are also much more focused on process. So oftentimes we have an exhibition or an artwork in the end of that process, but it's not necessarily always the case. And so there have been projects or experiments, especially with living materials, that have not worked out in the way that they were intended to work out. And we have, one of the projects that we organized last year in 3 phases with the artist Tuita Natsi-Swiss. She proposed to work with mushroom spores. And there were 3 phases to the project. And we realized that the mushrooms didn't react in the exact way that she intended to. But we decided, which, happens, it's a living thing. But we decided to keep it on view and to engage in dialogue around it because, I think if we are to rethink institutions and to really be more responsive to social, ecological, and other questions, then we need to acknowledge that this impetus at control or at arriving at a set goal is not always, or maybe, it's not helpful and it's not realistic either. So rather than hiding or to say that, okay, let's, move it to the back room, we engaged actively in conversations around this process. And to my mind, that is also part of our, offer to our communities to engage with us in dialogue, to not assume that we are the museum or institution presenting a final outcome for people to look at, to consume, but to actually engage in a much more open dialogue.
We have time for one more question.
I'm a teacher, I sit along. Okay, there you go. I'll wait forever. Someone ask a question.
Oh,
there's always.
Hi, I was just curious about Long Island City. How does maybe you already explained this, but how does all the growing population impact the programming curatorially? And not just the public out-facing, but just what you choose to curate. I mean, do you feel that it's impacted your narrative in some way?
Well, it's something we're in the process of learning. Speaking of some of those figures, I think it's an additional thing is that so there are, I think, around over 80,000 units that are in construction right now. So one of the things that we don't know is that I honestly don't know how the demographic of this neighborhood will change. That's one thing. There are mainly rental units there, so there will be a lot of movement. What we see right now in Long Island City, which I think maybe that speaks to your point a little bit, is that it's a neighborhood that doesn't have a lot of facilities that you have in other places in New York, like parks or public pools or a lot of these infrastructure that was built in New York. It's so art institutions are amongst the very few public free spaces that exist for the neighborhoods. But one of the things that we feel we need to focus on is to expand the public program to also understand how we can be more responsive to the changes and the demands and the desires of the community. And there's going to be a number of initiatives that we're currently working on that is not in a ready to kind of like publicly discuss, but I think the whole neighborhood is going to go even through further transformation as we speak. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for coming, and thank you to the 3 panelists for participating. It was great to speak to you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.